Starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for NCEA's webinar, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, a primer and guidance from the U.S. Department of Education. I'm Andrea Kopp, Assistant Director of Professional Development with NCEA, and I'm happy to be your host today. Before we begin, please know that your microphone connections have been muted. If you have questions or comments during today's presentation, please send those through the chat box that appears in your GoToWebinar control panel. To ask a question, use your mouse to click into the blank box area, type your question using your keyboard, and then click Send. The webinar presentation will last about an hour, and there'll be opportunities for questions and answers. You can post your questions or comments for the presenter at any time. Immediately following the presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief survey about your experience today, and I thank you in advance for providing us with this valuable feedback. You'll receive an email tomorrow with instructions on accessing this recording and the presentation materials, as well as a certificate of attendance. There are several handouts already loaded into your GoToWebinar control panel in the handout section that you can download now. Before we begin, I'd like to begin as we do all things in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death, amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. It's now my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Pamela Allen, Education Program Specialist with the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Non-Public Education. Welcome, Pamela, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Non-Public Education's presentation on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, with a specific focus on the provisions related to children with disabilities enrolled by their parents in private schools. And on behalf of the department and ONPE, I want to thank NCEA for inviting us to present and provide this important information to you. Well, just as the department is committed to advancing the needed education reforms to improve educational outcomes for students in public schools, we're also committed to supporting the effective implementation of the equitable services requirements for private school students under IDEA. To support this, we promote state educational agency, also known as SEA, and local educational agency, LEA, accountability for the provision of those requirements for eligible private school students. And based on feedback we have from stakeholders, we believe there's an opportunity to improve the implementation of IDEA equitable services requirements by SEAs and LEAs. This webinar is a component of ONPE's outreach and technical assistance activities that demonstrate our commitment to working with all stakeholders to enhance their knowledge of IDEA provisions and to support and assist SEAs and LEAs in this effort. So we'll start with a little bit of background about our office, ONPE, and Equitable Services. Since the initial passage of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, also known as ESEA, in 1965, private school students and teachers have been eligible to participate in certain federal education programs. In this context, ONPE fosters maximum participation of non-public school students and teachers in federal education programs and initiatives. And we do this by serving as the department's liaison to the non-public school community, representing the department to the non-public school community, and communicating interests and concerns of the non-public school community to the department. We offer advice and guidance within the department on all matters affecting non-public education and the participation of private school students and teachers in federal education programs and initiatives. And we communicate with national, state, and local educational agencies and associations on non-public education topics, just like the NCEA. And we provide parents with information regarding educational options for their children, technical assistance, workshops, and publications. We convene meetings and conference calls with the non-public school community and the department leadership to address education topics of interest and concern. We provide experience and expertise on choice and state regulation of private schools, and we collaborate with other department offices to facilitate the technical assistance, webinars, presentations, guidance, and the resolution of problems at the state and local levels regarding the implementation of equitable services. So if you're not familiar with our web page, there are several different ways to reach ONPE's web page, and one way to do this is to visit innovation.ed.gov and then click down on the drop-down menu under What We Do and select Private and Home Schools. Another way to visit our web page is to visit the Department of Education's main webpage, ed.gov, and type ONPE into the search bar to find us. When you do visit, we hope that you'll subscribe to our ONPE listserv, and you can see the arrow pointing down to that in the additional information box. It's a free service provided by the Department of Education that contains timely and important information on matters of interest to the non-public school community. If you do choose to subscribe, which we hope you will, be sure to check your inbox immediately after you subscribe, and you'll find a confirmation message that you will need to click to confirm. If it doesn't show up in your inbox, you might want to check your spam folder. Sometimes they have a tendency to land there. So today we're focusing on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, as it relates to children with disabilities enrolled by their parents in private schools. These children are often referred to as parentally placed children with disabilities. Our discussion today will concentrate on this narrowly defined population of students. ONPE has created a number of different resources to help clarify the IDEA requirements. The booklet pictured here specifically addresses these requirements, and it's available on ONPE's website as a PDF, or you can order it from EdPubs in booklet format. IDEA, as you know, is the federal law that ensures that all children with disabilities receive a free, appropriate public education, also known as FAPE, F-A-P-E. IDEA provides benefits and services to children with disabilities in public schools as well as in non-public schools, private, including those in religious schools. However, when parents choose to enroll their child with a disability in a private school, when the question of providing FAPE is not at issue, the public school district's responsibility to serve such children will differ from its responsibility to serve public school students with disabilities. Under IDEA, LEAs, local educational agencies, have an obligation to provide parentally placed children with disabilities an opportunity for equitable participation in services funded with federal Part B funds. The amount of Part B IDEA funds available for these services is based on the proportionate share calculation, which we'll discuss later in this presentation. Another resource is the Department's Questions and Answers on Serving Children with Disabilities Placed by Their Parents in Private Schools, which was revised in April 2011. And in your resources list, you'll see the IDEA Private School Q&A, April 2011. The Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services issued the Q&As to help clarify issues regarding the requirements for serving children with disabilities placed by their parents in private schools. Also in your resources list, you have the Key Points Regulations page. And throughout this presentation, you will notice a number of regulatory and statutory citations on the lower sections of each of the slides. This particular handout shows where each regulation is located in the Code of Federal Regulations. The topic, citation, and page number are all listed there for your convenience as you examine the regulations and follow along in this presentation. I'd like to direct you to the Federal Register excerpts document in your resources. This is where all of the regulations are located, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to read regulations. Reading regulations is not as difficult as what it might appear on the surface. The Federal Register page numbers are located in either the upper left or upper right-hand corner of each page, and you can see the page number circled in red at the top of this page. And the regulations are listed in numerical order within each section. So in this presentation, we will focus on the citations of the regulations in the Children in Private School section. So when you see the double S symbol, looks like two S's connected together, that means section. and where a particular regulation is located in the document, such as Section 300.129, which is a regulation outlined in red. This regulation is the first one in the section related to private school students. So anytime you see these two symbols together, the two S's, double S's together, it indicates that there are more than one section being cited, such as sections 300.130 through 300.144, which are the primary sections in the regulations that govern the equitable services provisions for children with disabilities enrolled by their parents in private schools. You can use this resource later on after the presentation to go through and reread the regulations if you seek further clarity. So let's begin with the definition of parentally placed children with disabilities. In general, when a child is enrolled in a private school by his or her parents because they have made an independent choice to do so, for the purposes of IDEA, the child's considered parentally placed. And this regulation is located at Section 300.130 in the regulations. The cross-references that you see in this definition are related to the definitions of elementary and secondary schools. And I want to point out and to make clear that participation in a federal or state private school choice program does not affect a private school student's eligibility for equitable services under ESEA or IDEA, any program under those laws. Like other private school students, a student is eligible for equitable services if the student meets the eligibility requirements for the program. Section 300.131 requires that an LEA must locate, identify, and evaluate all children with disabilities enrolled by their parents in private, including religious, elementary and secondary schools located in the school district served by the LEA. IDEA requires the LEA, after timely and meaningful consultation with private school representatives and representatives of parents of parentally placed private school children with disabilities, that they conduct a thorough and complete child find process to determine the number of parentally placed children with disabilities attending private schools located within the LEA, regardless of where those students live. And further, in Section 300.132A makes clear that to the extent with the number, consistent with the number and location of children with disabilities who are enrolled by their parents in private schools located in a school district served by the LEA, provision is made for the participation of those children. And these requirements make clear that the obligation to spend a proportionate amount of IDEA Part B funds to provide services to children with disabilities enrolled by their parents in private schools now lies in the school district served by the local educational agency. And note that we reference consultation here, and we will talk about child find and the consultation process in greater detail later in this presentation. Another important thing to note is that the public control of funds. The public agency must always keep control of and administer the IDEA funds used to provide special education and related services to parentally placed private school children with disabilities. Part B funds of IDEA for equitable services may not be paid directly to a private school. The LEA must also hold title to any materials, equipment, and property that might be used by an eligible parentally placed student who receives services under IDEA. Further, an LEA may not use Part B funds to finance the existing level of instruction in a private school, and such funds may not be used for meeting the needs of a private school or the general needs of the students enrolled in a private school. The record-keeping provision is also an important provision. The regulation located at 300.132, paragraph C, requires the LEA to maintain in its records and provide to the state educational agency, the SEA, the number of parentally placed private school students who are evaluated, the number of parentally placed private school students determined to be eligible under Part B of IDEA, and the number of children who are provided equitable services. So the number of children evaluated, the number determined eligible, and the number served. And now we're going to address the consultation provisions, which is one of the most significant components governing this part of IDEA. The regulation that describes the consultation requirements is located at Section 300.134 in the regulations. And you can see on this slide, it is highlighted and outlined in red and located on page 46767 of the Federal Register. As used in the regulations, consultation is a mandatory process that involves discussions between the LEA, the local educational agency, private school representatives, and representatives of parents of parentally placed private school children with disabilities on key issues related to the equitable participation of private school children with disabilities in federally funded special education and related services. Each LEA, or if appropriate, an NCEA, must consult in a timely and meaningful way with private school representatives and representatives of parents of parentally placed private school children during the design and development of special education and related services for this group of children. A unilateral offer of services by an LEA with no opportunity for discussion is not adequate consultation. Such an offer does not meet the basic requirements of the consultation process. Only after discussing key issues relating to the provision of special education and related services with the representatives may an LEA make its final decisions with respect to the services to be provided to this eligible group of children with disabilities. Some of the required consultation topics are what we'll focus on now, and throughout the consultation process there are topics that are required points of consultation. The first one is located at 300.134 paragraph A and addresses the child find process that we referenced before. A child find is an ongoing process. Therefore, if a child who enters a private school without having been previously identified as a child with disability is suspected of having a disability during the school year, the LEA where the private school is located is responsible for ensuring that the child is identified, located, and evaluated. In addition, it's possible that a child who was previously evaluated and determined not eligible for special ed and related services by another LEA may in fact be determined eligible for special ed and related services at a later time through the child find process conducted by the LEA where the private school is located. An accurate count of the number of eligible children with disabilities enrolled by their parents in private schools located in the LEA is needed to calculate the proportionate share of Part B funds that the LEA must expend annually for services for this group of students. Let's talk about child find a little bit. Under Section 300.131, the LEA where the private school is located is responsible for conducting child find for parentally placed private school children with disabilities. IDEA requires that the LEA, after timely and meaningful consultation with private school representatives, conduct a thorough and complete child find process to determine the number of parentally placed children with disabilities attending private schools located in the LEA, regardless of where those students live. The child find requirements for parentally placed children make clear that the LEA, after timely and meaningful consultation with the private school representatives, must conduct a thorough and complete child find process to determine the number of parentally placed children with disabilities attending private schools. And the LEA is responsible for locating them, identifying, and evaluating all children with disabilities who are enrolled by their parents in private, including religious elementary schools. And in conducting the child find for these students, the LEA must undertake activities similar to activities undertaken for the agency's public school children. The child find process must be completed in a time period comparable to that for public school students. and the LEA where the private elementary or secondary school is located has a number of options as to how it meets its child find responsibilities. For example, an LEA may assume the responsibility itself or contract with another agency, including another public agency, where the child maybe resides, or make other arrangements by contracting with a third party, for instance, to conduct child find activities. I'd like to point you out to you in your handout sections in the Q&A document, FAQ B2. We often receive questions about response to intervention at ONPE, and this question discusses the response to intervention. In IDEA and its implementing regulations 300, 301 through 311, it establishes the requirements with which LEAs must comply when conducting an initial evaluation to determine if a child qualifies as a child with a disability under Part B. These requirements in 300, 301 through 311 do not apply to private schools. IDEA requires states to adopt criteria for determining whether a child has a specific learning disability as defined in 300.8 paragraph C10, and these criteria must permit, among other things, the use of the process based on a child's response to scientific research-based intervention, also known as RTI. And that's at 300, 307A2. Thus, although an LEA permits the use of RTI in evaluating children suspected of having learning disabilities, it does not require LEAs to use RTI. Even if a state's criteria permits LEAs to use RTI in evaluating children suspected of having learning disabilities, IDEA does not require an LEA to use RTI for parentally placed children attending private schools located in its jurisdiction. It would be inconsistent with the IDEA evaluation provisions in sections 300, 301 through 311 for an LEA to delay the initial evaluation because a private school has not implemented an RTI process with a child suspected of having learning disabilities and has not reported the results of the process to the LEA. Under Child Find, there are a few additional provisions that need to be considered. There is a distinction under IDEA between the obligation to conduct child find activities, including the individual evaluations for parentally placed children with disabilities, and the obligation to use an amount of funds equal to the proportionate amount of the LEA's subgrant to provide special education and related services to those children with disabilities enrolled by their parents in private schools. The obligation to conduct child find, including the initial individual evaluations, exists independently from the obligations to provide equitable services. The costs of child find activities, such as evaluations, may not be considered in determining whether the LEA has spent an appropriate amount in providing special education-related services to parentally placed private school children with disabilities. The child find provision in 300.131F, you can see that in the lower left-hand corner of the slide, makes clear that the LEA where the private elementary and secondary school is located is responsible for conducting child find, including individual evaluations of all parentally placed private school children suspected of having a disability who are enrolled in private elementary and secondary schools located in the LEA. This is regardless of where those children reside. This includes all children from other states who may be attending private elementary schools and secondary schools located in the LEA. In the LEA where the private school is located, in consultation with private school officials and representatives of parents of parentally placed private school children with disability, the LEA where the private school is located is responsible for determining and paying for the services to be provided to out-of-state parentally placed private school children with disabilities attending private elementary schools located in the LEA. And under 300.131F, these out-of-state children must be included in the group of parentally placed children whose needs are considered in determining which private school students with disabilities will be served and which types of services and amounts of services to be provided. And we'll talk a little bit more of some of the required consultation topics, including the proportionate share. The consultation involves the determination of the proportionate share of federal funds available for services under 300.133 paragraph B, including a discussion of how the proportionate share was calculated. The revisions to IDEA in 2004 made a significant change in the manner in which the proportionate share is calculated. Under the 2004 amendments to the IDEA, the proportionate share calculation must be based on the total number of children with disabilities who are enrolled in private schools located in the LEA, whether or not the children or their parents reside in the LEA. And that brings us to expenditures. More specifically, each LEA must expend the following amounts on providing special ed and related services, including direct services to parentally placed private school children with disabilities. And for children aged 3 through 21, an amount that is in the same proportion as the LEA's total subgrant under Section 611F of the IDEA as the number of private school children with disabilities aged 3 through 21 who are enrolled by their parents in private, including religious, elementary and secondary schools located in the school district served by the LEA. And in the same as that is to the total number of children with disabilities in its jurisdiction that are served, aged 3 through 21. And for the children aged 3 through 5, the preschool-age children, an amount that is the same proportion of the LEA's total subgrant under Section 619G of the IDEA as the number of parentally placed private school children with disabilities aged 3 through 5 who are enrolled by their parents in private, including religious, elementary schools located in the district served by the LEA is to the number of the children with disabilities in its jurisdiction aged 3 through 5. Appendix B of the regulations provides a sample of how to make that calculation. An example is also included in our IDEA booklet. When it comes to preschool children with disabilities, an LEA's obligation to serve children aged 3 through 5 under the equitable services provisions depends on whether a child is enrolled in a private elementary school or facility that meets the definition of elementary school in IDEA in the final regulations. Elementary school is defined in Section 300.13 of the regulations as a nonprofit institutional day or residential school, including public elementary charter school that provides elementary education as determined under state law. Accordingly, 3 to 5-year-old children with disabilities who are enrolled by their parents in a private school or facility that meets the state's definition of elementary school would be considered parentally placed, and the equitable participation provisions would apply. A child aged 3 through 5 enrolled by his or her parents in a private school or facility that does not meet the state's definition of elementary school would not be eligible to be considered for equitable services. However, it's important to note that the state's obligation to make FAPE available to such children remains. Section 612A1 of the IDEA requires that states make FAPE available to eligible children with disabilities aged 3 through 21 in the state's mandated age range, and this is in Section 300.101 of the regulations. Because many LEAs do not offer public preschool programs, particularly for age 3 and 4-year-olds, LEAs often make FAPE available to eligible preschool children with disabilities in private schools or facilities in accordance with 300.145 through 147 of the regulations. In these circumstances, there is no requirement that a private school or facility be a quote-unquote elementary school under the state law. Let's talk a little bit about expenditures. An accurate count of the number of eligible private school children with disabilities enrolled by their parents in private schools located in the LEA is needed to calculate the proportionate share of Part B funds that an LEA must expend annually. for services for parentally placed private school children with disabilities. As we've already discussed, the regulations in 300.132C require the LEA to maintain in its records and provide to the NCEA the number of parentally placed children evaluated, the number determined to be eligible, and the number of children who are provided services. This puts the emphasis on the need to maintain accurate and complete records. Additionally, we want to talk a little bit about the consultation process, as this is also a required consultation topic. The discussion must also address how the consultation process is going to operate throughout the school year among the representatives of the public agency, the private schools, and parents of parentally placed private school children with disability, including how it will take place, how it will operate through the year to ensure that parentally placed children with disabilities identified through the Child Find process can meaningfully participate in special education and related services. So this brings us to the sample organizational consultation chart that you have in your references. So if you take a look at the consultation chart, you have a copy of this. And effective consultation provides a genuine opportunity for all parties to express their views and to have those views considered by the LEA before the LEA makes any decision that has an impact on the services to parentally placed private school children with disabilities. Timeliness is critical to effective consultation, and it requires collaboration between the LEA and the private school officials in developing a timeline and selecting dates for consultation. This chart shows a partial example of sample timeline that could be used to help monitor the consultation process. This document is also available for download on ONPE's IDEA pages. And let's remember too that successful consultation establishes positive and productive working relationships that make planning easier and ensure that the services provided meet the needs of eligible parentally placed private school children with disabilities. The consultation process is important to ensure that the provision of equitable services happens as intended by law. With that in mind, the LEA must also discuss how, where, and by whom special education and related services will be provided. This includes a discussion of the types of services, including direct services and alternate service delivery mechanisms, as well as how the services will be apportioned if funds are insufficient to serve all children, and how and when decisions regarding services will be made. This is located in Section 300.134D of the regulations. Now, sometimes there will be disagreement about equitable services. With that in mind, if LEA representatives disagree with the views of the private school officials on the provision of services or on the types of services, whether provided directly or through a contract, the LEA must provide to the private school officials a written explanation of the reasons why the LEA chose not to adopt those recommendations from the private school officials. Let's talk about the basic requirements for the provision of equitable services now. It's important to note that timely and meaningful consultation must occur before any decisions are made that will affect the participation of parentally placed children in Part B programs. Thus, the decisions about services may not be made in advance or in absence of timely and meaningful consultation. After timely and meaningful consultation has occurred with representatives of private schools and representatives of parents of parentally placed children with disability, the LEA is responsible for making the final decisions about all aspects of the services to be provided to that group of children. And for further reference, you can see Section 300.137 for additional details. Decisions about which services and the amounts of services that children with disabilities enrolled by their parents in private schools will receive are made during the consultation process and are based on the needs of the children designated to receive services. These children have no individual entitlement to receive some or all of the special ed and related services they would receive if they were enrolled in a public school. And that's a very important thing to note. In addition, it's important to note that a unilateral offer of services by an LEA with no opportunity for discussion is not adequate consultation. Such an offer does not meet the basic requirements of the consultation process. Only after discussing key issues related to the provision of special education and related service with all representatives may an LEA make its final decision with respect to the services to be provided to the eligible private school children with disabilities. The consultation process is also important to ensure the provision of equitable services, how, where, by whom the special education services will be provided for the children. And if a child is selected to receive equitable services, they must be provided, the services must be provided in accordance with a services plan. And a services plan must describe the specific special education and related services that will be provided to a parentally placed private school child with a disability, and that's designated to receive the services. Additional information about services plan are at 300-138B. Let's talk about what a services plan is specifically. A services plan should reflect only the services offered to parentally placed private school children with disabilities who are designated to receive services. Children with disabilities enrolled in public schools or are publicly placed in private schools are entitled to a FAPE and must receive a full range of services under Part B of IDEA. Those services are determined by a child's IEP, Individualized Educational Program team, and are necessary to meet the child's individual needs and provide FAPE. The IEPs for these children generally will be more comprehensive than services plans developed for parentally placed private school children with disabilities who are designated to receive services. This is because parentally placed children do not have an individual entitlement to any or all services that the children would receive if they were enrolled in a public school. In addition, a services plan is required to meet the IEP content requirements that are described in Section 320 of the regulations, or when appropriate for children aged 3 through 5, the Individualized Family Services Plan, which is an IFSP, and those requirements are described in 300.323B, to the extent appropriate and only in relation to the services that are to be provided. Further, a services plan must be developed, reviewed, and revised consistent with the regulations located at 300.321 through 300.324. Additionally, an LEA must initiate and conduct meetings to develop, review, and revise the services plan for these children with disabilities enrolled by their parents in private schools who are designated to receive services. The LEA must ensure that a representative of the private school or religious school attends the meeting. And attends each meeting, rather. And if a representative cannot attend, the LEA must use other methods to ensure the participation of the religious or other private school, including individual meetings or conference telephone calls. And the services plan must, to the extent appropriate, again, be revised, developed, reviewed, and revised consistent with the IEP provisions. Equitable services and the regulations at 300.138C clarify that the equitable services must be provided by employees of a public agency or through contract by a public agency with an individual, association, agency, organization, or other entity. An LEA may use the Part B funds to make school personnel from the public schools available in non-public school facilities to the extent necessary to provide equitable services for private school children with disabilities, and if those services are not normally provided by the private school. An LEA may use Part B funds to pay for the services of an employee of a private school to provide equitable services if the employee performs his services outside his or her regular hours of duty and the employee performs services under public supervision and control. And you can reference 300.142 for the provision of services under that area. Additionally, it's important to note that all the services must be secular, neutral, and non-ideological, including the materials and equipment that students may require. So location of services and transportation of services is also an important provision to understand. The services may be provided on the premises of a private school, including religious schools, to the extent consistent with law. And the phrase to the extent consistent with law is located in Section 612A10A of the IDEA. The Department interprets this to mean that the provision of services on the premise of a private school must take place in a manner that would not violate the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and would not be inconsistent with applicable state constitutions or laws. The Department generally believes that unless there is a compelling rationale for these services to be provided off-site, LEAs should provide services on-site at the child's private school so as not to unduly disrupt the child's educational experience. The location of services is one of the subjects that must be addressed during the consultation process among LEA officials, private school representatives, and representatives of parents of parentally placed private school children with disabilities. After the consultation process and giving due consideration to the views of the private school officials, the LEA will make a final decision regarding services and location and transportation. Just for additional reference, the Q&A in the Q&A document, FAQ F2, addresses the issue of location of services and transportation. If someone is looking to find out how the location of services is determined, you can refer to this FAQ, as the location of services is one of the subjects that must be discussed during the consultation process. The regulation at 300.139B requires that, if necessary, for a child to benefit from participation in services provided under the private school provisions, that an LEA must provide a parentally placed private school child with a disability transportation from the child's school or the child's home to a site other than the private school, and from the service site to the private school or to the child's home, depending on the timing of the services. And the IDEA does not require an LEA to provide transportation from the child's home to the private school. The LEA may include the cost of the transportation in calculating whether it has spent the proportionate share of Part B funds in providing services to the parentally placed private school children with disabilities that are required under Section 300.133. And after timely and meaningful consultation has occurred, the LEA must maintain documentation that the consultation has occurred, including a written affirmation signed by the representatives of the private schools. And this is required under 300.135 of the regulations. Some have asked if signing an attendance sheet at a meeting is all that's needed to document that adequately that timely and meaningful consultation has occurred. Though these attendance sheets provide an accounting of who has attended meetings, the sheets themselves do not provide evidence that ongoing consultation has occurred. Therefore, the written affirmation signed by the representatives of participating private schools should reflect that those officials have indeed participated in timely and meaningful consultation and that it has continued throughout the school year. If representatives do not provide the affirmation within a reasonable time, the LEA must forward that documentation of the consultation process to the NCEA. Under 300.136, the compliance regulation, a private school has the right to complain to the NCEA that the LEA did not engage in consultation that was meaningful and timely, or that the LEA did not give due consideration to the views of the private school official. And under this provision, a complaint must provide the basis of the private school official's belief that the LEA did not comply with the consultation requirements. The LEA must forward appropriate documentation related to the complaint to the NCEA. If the private school official is dissatisfied with the decision of the NCEA, the state educational agency, then that official may submit a complaint to the United States Department of Education Secretary, providing the basis of the official's belief that the LEA did not comply with the consultation requirements, and then the NCEA must forward to the appropriate documentation related to the complaint to the Secretary of Education. The due process provisions are provided in 300.140B. And a parent of a child enrolled in a private school has the right to file a due process complaint regarding the child fine requirements in 300.131, including the requirements in 300 through 300.311. And that complaint must be filed with an LEA in which the private school is located, and a copy must be forwarded to the state educational agency by the LEA. The due process provisions in Section 615 of the Act and in the regulations at 300.504 through 300.519 do not apply to issues regarding the provision of services to any particular parentally placed child with disabilities whom the LEA has agreed to serve. This is because there is no individual right to services for such children under IDEA. Disputes that may arise about equitable services are, however, properly subject to the state complaint procedures in Sections 300.151 through 300.153. And this is provided in 300.140C. A parent may file a signed written complaint in accordance with the state complaint procedures, alleging that the state or the LEA has failed to meet the private school requirements, such as failure to properly conduct the consultation process. Now let's shift a little bit to the state complaints that are available through the private school officials. Under Section 300.136, a private school official has the right to complain. Oops, let me go back. Sorry. A private school official has the right to complain to the NCEA that the LEA did not engage in consultation that was timely and meaningful, or that it did not give due consideration to the views of the private school official. And under this provision, a complaint must provide the basis of the private school official's belief that the LEA did not comply with the consultation requirements. We're going to shift a little bit now. We've kind of wrapped up the meat of the presentation, and just to clarify, some people often have questions whether or not the highly qualified teacher requirements, the HQT provisions, whether those provisions are applicable to private school teachers. Our FAQ G1 addresses this, and it's important to know that these provisions do not apply to special ed teachers hired by a private elementary or secondary school, including private school teachers that are hired or contracted by LEAs to provide equitable services to parentally placed private school children with disabilities under 300.138. So as I referenced at the beginning of the presentation, we have a number of resources available on the Department of Education's website. and ONPE's IDEA page, and we want to make sure that you know where to find these resources. So these links will take you directly to each of the numerous resources that the department maintains, and it's for your convenience. We hope that you find them helpful in your work, and should you need any additional materials or resources, please let us know. We'll be happy to consider your requests and see how we can best help you in the future. Again, my name is Pamela Allen. I am ONPE's primary IDEA contact. My direct phone, the direct line to Office of Non-Public Education is 202-401-1365, and we have a main ONPE mailbox that you can send any of your inquiries to if you have need further clarification or have additional questions after you've had a chance to review all of the materials that were presented today. I know we provided a lot of information for you.
Oh, Pamela, we had a couple questions come in from the audience. Can you tell us, is there a federal definition of inclusion, and what does the law require and not require regarding least restrictive environment?
Well, there is no definition of inclusion in IDEA, and the least restrictive environment provisions do not apply to private schools, so none of the provisions that are located in IDEA require any private school official or school to administer any portion of IDEA, and that would include the LRE provisions.
Great. And one final question. What records consultation must an LEA maintain?
Well, when it comes to the consultation records, it's very important that only after timely and meaningful consultation has occurred that the LEA submits the written affirmation about the consultation records. We have a Q&A about this at A3 on page 10 of the Q&As, and some people, again, have asked if signing an attendance sheet at a meeting is all that's required to adequately document that timely and meaningful consultation has occurred. And we have been very clear in our guidance that although these sheets provide an accounting of who's actually attended the meetings, the sheets themselves do not provide the evidence that's needed to demonstrate that ongoing consultation has occurred. So the written affirmation that's signed by the representatives of the private schools attending the meetings should reflect that those officials have actually indeed participated in timely and meaningful consultation that is continued throughout the school year.
Great. Well, I think that concludes our questions for today, and I want to thank you for everything that you've shared with us and thank our audience for their participation and questions. Did you have any final words before we wrap up?
Well, thank you, Andrea. We're really grateful, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Non-Public Education, very grateful to have the opportunity to share this information with you today. And again, my contact information is there for you. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have additional questions or concerns or need additional clarity about any of the information that we provided today.
Thank you so much, and I invite all of our attendees to visit our website at ncea.org to see listings for upcoming webinars as well as our summer professional development activities. We have our upcoming Exceptional Learners Conference, which will be held in June just outside of Chicago. Registration is now open for that event, as well as our Institute for Catholic School Leaders, which will be in July in Waltham, Massachusetts. Also, our call for proposals for our NCEA National Convention in 2018 is open now through June 2nd, so please feel free to submit a session proposal or ask one of your talented staff or colleagues to do so. As a reminder, I'll be sending you this webinar recording as well as the presentation materials, handouts, and a certificate of attendance via email within the next 24 hours. Thank you all again for your participation, and may you enjoy a blessed evening.